How do you feel about this raid? So when I think of my top raids of all time, excluding like the old era WoW, so this is just purely from MoP onwards, so not including the ancient shit because it's hard to compare between eras. My list, in not really any particular order, is like Throne of Thunder, Blackrock Foundry, Nighthold, Siege of Orgrimmar, and Castle Nathria. That was my 5 before Amirdrassil comes out. Does Amirdrassil make it into your top 5 raids? And if so, which one does it kick out for you?
Hey guys, real quick, just want to thank the sponsor of this video, Factor. As most of you guys know, I recently just finished up the Race to World First.
Come on! Yeah!
And after not being home for about 3 weeks, coming home to enjoy delicious, quick and easy meals from Factor was a real luxury. Cross meal prepping off your list this holiday season with Factor. Skip the meal planning, grocery shopping, chopping, prepping, and cleaning up, and get Factor's fresh, never frozen meals delivered straight to your door. I also recently just discovered that Factor isn't just for dinner. They also offer an assortment of 55 plus add-ons to suit various preferences and tastes. So you can choose from quick breakfast items, lunch to go, grab and go snacks, and ready to drink cold pressed juices, shakes, and smoothies. They sent me the smoothies this time. I really like those. If you want to give Factor a try, head to factor75.com or click the link below and use the code MAXIMUM50 to get 50% off your first Factor box. That's factor75.com or use the link below. Use code MAXIMUM50 to get 50% off of your first Factor box. Thank you, Factor.
So before the raid, we do what we normally do, which is we take these bosses on PTR and we rank them based on, well, I think it's basically design, because that's all you really can do at that point. Like tuning does matter, but like in PTR, like you're not really guessing on the tuning part of it. So mostly based on design, and then we see how they end up. I think we could maybe have Fyrakk in the video do like a little bit of like a supercut to see how wrong or right we were about Vault and Abyss. But I think they were generally okay. I don't think they were like, were we super wrong about any of them? Do you remember any off the top of your head?
Abyss?
Yeah, like were we like just totally fucking wrong on any fight in those 2 raids?
Like Kurog and Zaskarn, I think we're both too high on.
Yeah. That I think those. Yeah, but I don't think there was any like S tiers that were D, or like I think it was more like A's to C's. I think if I remember, maybe Echo of Neltharion too. Oh, we could do a whole potty C on private auras. I just figured that out. But okay. That's a whole thing. So yeah, we'll start here. So starting with Gnarlroot. We said it was a tier boss. Again, for people who are watching this, you can see on like our old rankings that Smolderon and Gnarlroot are right next to each other. That does not mean we think Smolderon and Gnarlroot are like very similar like boss like quality, right? Like Smolderon is supposed to be something better than Gnarlroot. Gnarlroot's the first boss in the raid. Actually, wait, didn't we do our pre-rankings with you giving your answers first and then I gave mine?
Yeah,
let's do that again.
You made me do that. That made it very hard.
That made it. Yo, you don't want to do that?
I'm down to do it again.
Yeah, we'll do it.
Obviously, it's easier to go second.
Yeah, we'll have you go first.
Okay. So Gnarlroot.
Yeah, Gnarlroot. What is your opinion on this fight after seeing it and doing it?
Yeah, I think I'm pretty happy to land this in like A tier. Again, like you were saying, we're not comparing this against all bosses. We're comparing this like against all first bosses, and I don't think there's really any complaints you can have about this. It's a fun first boss. It's going to be fun to farm. It melts during that damage amp phase, right? Like it's I don't know, it has a few mechanics, but none of them like one-shot you or anything stupid like that or are hard to understand. It's going to be eminently puggable.
Yeah, it's free loot. I agree with all of that. Okay, so I had to ask myself this question. This boss seems like, I have no idea why this isn't an S tier first boss, but I agree with you. Like, I think it's A. If I were to say like, because when you're saying S tier first boss in the S tier, you're basically saying that's like the best or one of the first bosses of all time. And for first boss, it's so hard to do that because unless a boss is inherently difficult and requires you to make difficult decisions, you can't really say it's awesome. And like first bosses just very rarely require that of people without it being too much. So my question to you would be, what does an S tier first boss even look like? Like I think we said Shriekwing was awesome, right? Like an S tier first boss, but this boss is like kind of like Shriekwing, but there's just a damage amp, and damage amp is always usually a net positive, especially on an early fight. So why isn't this S?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you're trying to do this super objectively, it probably is S. I don't know. For me, it's just a case of like first bosses. It would have to be something I haven't seen yet that would cause me to get like S tier enjoyment out of a first boss.
Well, you said like it probably should be S. For me,
Yeah.
I remember Shriekwing much more fondly than Gnarlroot. And I think Shriekwing was harder to pug. I think there was no damage amp, but the intermission was kind of unique and very interesting. And I don't know, I just thought that was kind of better. Like this one is almost like more basic. So maybe if Gnarlroot was somehow a little bit more challenging, that it would be there. But then that's brings in the whole like, do you even want a first boss to be challenged? I don't know. I that was just something I've racked my brain around, is like, if Gnarlroot isn't an S tier first boss, what is? And the only thing that came to my mind is Shriekwing, and I think the bosses are so similar that it's crazy to say that one is S and one isn't. But I do kind of feel like it is a tier fight. Like it's a tier below, but I don't know why. I think I'm just too stupid or something.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of arbitrariness and feel or whatever that it just makes it hard for it would just be hard for me to put it in S tier as well, but I can't really justify it.
Okay, so I'm okay with that. We can move on pretty early from Gnarlroot. All right, we put the next boss, Igira, which we referred to in the video as Rashok's wife. So that's the official lore. What was your impression of this after doing it?
Yeah, I don't know, solid, decent. I think the PTR version of this fight it kind of proved that there was maybe a little bit more potential with the mechanic, that like this could have been later in the raid and been tuned up a little bit more and been something that, you know, maybe could have taken like Larodar's place or something if they'd wanted it to. But overall, I think it worked pretty well. I think it's going to be a good second boss. You know, it's got a bunch of mechanics that are nothing offensive, nothing super inspired.
Yeah, I mean,
don't know, I'd be pretty happy to put this in
like,
A after fighting it.
In A, okay, see, that's something that I feel like Igira is even more mid than I thought. And I noticed when we were ranking this before, I remember I brought up something like, I love fights where you can choose kind of the progression of the fight. There's been a bunch of those. You can kind of refer to them as like a build-a-boss. Like, it's what Kurog should have been. It's what Lei Shen was. It's what kind of Enerva should have been, but wasn't. Like, bosses where you can choose either what time you do each phase, or you can choose how hard a phase will be. I just think bosses like that are super, super awesome. I do think that you can't really accomplish that this early in the raid. That like Igira, you could have picked any weapon and that decision wouldn't have mattered. So that to me is like a failure of that, but also it's the second boss. I think if Igira was later in the raid, it even then would have probably still been mid. I'm actually more down on Igira than when we rated it. I think Igira is like, here's the main reason why. When we were doing this on testing and we were rating it based on testing, this boss did like a phase with 0 to 100 energy where it just threw spears and basically did a frontal, and that was it. And then it went to its weapons and it did more weapon stuff. And what they ended up releasing on live was it does the same amount of weapon stuff, but the boss is just spamming spears. I think the boss spawning spears the whole time, I think they realized they needed to add some complexity to the phases. But in doing that, you're just kind of hitting spears for however long you're fighting this boss. And I think that is super repetitive and lame. Like, that's how I feel like it changed.
Yeah, I mean, it's just tough because I don't know what they're supposed to do with the second boss if it's not like that.
I mean,
but
would you prefer Igira?
Right. Like, this might be why both this and Gnarlroot are just a little bit like there's just something missing, right?
Well, like, would you take Igira over Amalgamation Chamber? I think Amalgamation Chamber is an infinitely better boss than Igira. Like, it's so much better.
That's fair. Amalgamation Chamber is definitely better.
I think Taros
You didn't really
is
go
better.
there second, but you could have, I guess. People did sometimes.
Yeah. Like, I guess maybe you talked about this before. You said you love Zakali Assault, right?
I did like Zakali Assault. Yeah. I mean, I thought it was so much better than we thought it was going to be, actually. But we thought it was going to be real bad, and it ended up just kind of being like a fun little ad time.
Yeah. My only thought is, I'm just thinking, like, would you rather fight Eye of the Jailer or Igira? I'd rather fight Eye of the Jailer, and I think Eye of the Jailer is just a worse Amalgamation Chamber. I'd rather fight the 9 than Igira. I would rather fight Huntsman or Zymox rather than Igira. Igira just seems worse to me than
I would rather
all
fight
of those.
Igira than Eye of the Jailer or the 9. I'd
Okay.
rather fight it than Zymox. I would rather fight Huntsman or Amalgamation Chamber over it, though. So I think we're just kind of in a like this isn't a case of us disagreeing on tier.
Yeah.
Like, we actually have a different ordering here. So how about, sounds like you're leaning like B or C, and I'm A or
leaning B or
so.
C, and you said initially A, and you're leaning B, so I think I'm okay with B.
I'm fine with B as well. Yeah,
Yeah,
it seems
okay,
like a good,
we'll do B.
good place to leave it.
Let's do, I don't remember exactly the order we did. We can either do each wing first, or we can do the bosses in their order they were killed. Actually, I mean, we killed the bosses in the order of the wings, which is a thing I wish more guilds did. It's a very Giga Chad move. I think only us and Echo did it this race, where you go down one wing and you kill all the bosses in the wing before killing the easy boss of the other wing, just so you don't run back and forth for a couple minutes. That always goes hard as fuck.
Yeah, it's kind of base.
Okay, let's start with Volcoross then, in the Fire Wing. So I showed a mythic testing VOD of this the other day on stream. Did you catch that?
No,
Probably
I did
not. Okay, I'm gonna show it again, just so people understand why I felt like this boss was awesome. And that is that in testing, it was tuned to have like a ton of HP, and we didn't spend the entire time that we had allotted to us actually progressing this fight. But for the time we did, it was like super fun, and it was actually like a pretty cool check. So mechanically, I think this is like easier than Taros, but let me pull this up here. All right, so this was we had like a couple pulls left in our testing, and we could have tried to kill it after this, but we stopped early just to talk about Tindral, which was right after this. But I want you to see how close this got. This was like what the boss was on testing. Okay, you do the last thing at 10%, you get knocked to the middle, and you have to hit the boss from 10% to 0 through like what should be like the hardened rage by using like every single healer cooldown. So we're like all pixel stacked. I think the boss just had a lot of health in this testing, or like we had 0 gear. But like, look at this. We have like pre-barriers down. The boss casts Serpent's Fury, and you have to do 4.5% in Serpent's Wrath. And like, just look at our HP pool. This is with every cooldown in the game, every personal, right? So I was so high on this boss. You heard me saying, and I think we wiped at like 0.5%. We had 15 minutes left in testing, but we just stopped and prepared for the next boss. But it was like fun to optimize damage on it. It's a hard 5-minute enrage with a big thing like that at the end. And that to me is why you were saying initially, because I want to give you some credit. People in chat are going to be like, why did you have Volcoross ranked so high? For me, I think it's because I had that experience. You were wanting to say B, and I was like, no, you don't get it. This is fucking perfect. Every raid should have an early boss that is just easy mechanically, a little 5-minute single target check, and it's awesome. And that didn't end up happening. I think this boss loses points because of how easy it was.
Yeah, exactly. Like, it's at the terrorist position in the raid, but it doesn't scratch the same itch because it doesn't actually, challenge guilds that reach it when they reach it. Because whenever you reach this, like, if you had the DPS to kill Igira before her enrage, you have the DPS to kill Volcoross before its enrage, which like shouldn't be true of the DPS check Taros, even if it is third in the raid.
And I want to be clear about one thing. This is not just from our perspective. Like, I am not naive enough to think that Blizzard is going to tune fucking Volcoross to be a DPS challenge for us after running a million splits with full 4-piece and also being like the best players in the world. Like, I totally get that this boss is going to be one shot by us and Echo for sure, and a lot of other good guilds. The thing is it was like 20 to 30% easier than that. It was way too easy. Like, even Taros was like a couple of pulls on progression. It was just like a little tighter, and people didn't think Taros was bullshit if you didn't do split gear. Like, I mean, this was just a totally different animal. Like, this boss probably had like 100 million or something less health than it should have, and it would have still been killed in mostly the same amount of pulls, and it just wouldn't have died like a minute and a half before the fight was over. I don't know. I think it was definitely like way too undertuned.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think it like 10% more health or something would have been a starting point.
So this boss can really only be compared to Taros. It is just Taros, but made a kind of Skull-X, I guess, maybe too, but it's like that early raid single target boss. How well do you think it did at accomplishing that?
I think C is probably where I'd put this, just because it's a boss that lives and dies on the tuning, and therefore it dies on the tuning.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And mechanically, I mean, it also had less going on mechanically than Taros or Skull-X easily. So it was just way easier than those fights, and the damage check was easier. And I feel like both of those, like this, you do not need to do splits. I do not know of like any guild that didn't go in and like 2-shot Volcoross. Like no matter, you could have gone in there with 0 splits and 1-shot this boss. And I don't know. I think it could have just been a little bit better than that. So you're right. It lives and dies on the tuning. It has to lose points. That being said, I do not want to discourage Blizzard from making Volcorosses. I think Volcorosses as a concept are awesome. If you're making a 10 boss raid, there's always going to be room for Volcoross to be there in the beginning. So I hope you make more of them, but also I think you could be a little bit less conservative with the numbers. I know how I feel about Larodar. I want to hear hear it purely from you.
I was kind of disappointed by the live version of Larodar. I thought it was another boss that from the testing had a lot of hype, a lot of possibilities associated with it, right? Like it seemed like it was going to be pretty cool. I was expecting a fight where, you know, you do all 3 of the blazes in P1 and then you push into P2 based off the timer, and you're just doing as much damage as you can, and then you hit P2 and it's like you know, try and get over the finish line as the room is getting more and more dire, and you know, you're running out of resources. But then again, there's just bizarrely like nothing does any damage in P2. You push P2 with percent instead of with time, which is so strange to me on a fight like this. Like
a very good point, actually.
It shouldn't work that way.
Like it could just be a better fight if instead of 3 full phases it does 2, but there's just a little bit more going on, and every bit of damage you do in those 2 matters for killing the boss at the end.
Yeah, because the way you do it right now is you just kind of push whenever you want, and then you hit lust and you take the boss from 35 to 0, and you get like 1 of the fall off bombs, but those don't even do that much damage. The spread things don't do much damage. The tank stuff doesn't do much damage. Like if you just CC 8 trees when they spawn, then you win the fight, which I think is quite bad. So I don't know. For me, this is also a C.
Wow. Okay. So we're a bit different on this. I fucking love Larodar. I think obviously it was too easy. I think it's weird for me to say too easy though, because like a lot of times people will hear me say a boss is too easy and they'll immediately just like have an emotional reaction to that. They're just like, what's easy for you is good for everyone, and like all that stuff. Like, yeah, I wish this boss would have taken a little bit longer, but I still think this is the best healer boss they've ever made. I think this is extremely unique. Like the whole room clearing thing is awesome. Obviously this raid was reminiscent of Firelands. This is very much last phase of Ragnaros clearing the room. That's the inspiration here. I just think they nailed that part of it. I think the clearing of the fire, I think like the mythic mechanic could have been made a little bit better. I think the soaking mechanic was fine. The whole killing the trees and healing them. I think if you're a healer, I understand the frustration behind like boss frames and healing and stuff. I think that's just a general problem in this raid. But I just think that I give them a lot of credit for being very creative and making a boss. No boss has ever been like this, and I think they deserve a lot of points for making a boss like that, and in my opinion making it pretty good. That being said, this boss was a little bit too easy. Like we had like a really cool CC plan in the last phase and we never even really had to use it. So our idea for this was, you know, you have I hate how zoomed out this is, but you have like the boss generally here, you have like the entire room covered in this fire, right? Just everywhere, this fire everywhere, and then you try to clear as much of this going in as you can, and then like for where the trees actually spawn and need to be CC'd, there was 8 of them, so we had like a really cool setup where you didn't need to play in a huge space, and you had like 4 here, 4 here. You like hunter trap these 2, you like blinded necks on these 2, you had like paralysis if you got like a 3rd wave, you got like these 2 just got cleaved under the boss, and then these back ones all got rooted here by a druid. But to make them all stack up for the root without needing a second DK, which is always a challenge in this raid, like DK is really good for grips in this raid, but you like didn't want one because their damage wasn't great. So what we had is we had our 2 Augs, which actually during testing was 4 Augs for this, which was very close to being the case until that nerf on Friday. We had 2 Augs each dreamwalk a tree onto the root pile. Just stand next to the root, cast dreamwalk, they'll just walk straight there and then just get mass rooted, so you didn't have to do that with grips. And that works every time. You have like 15 ads rooted in the back of the room, and like that was like fun to do. This boss in our reclear, we I think had this much room. I don't know if you watched the reclear, you probably didn't, but we did it with this. We did the boss like this. We had like we just pushed on our first pull of the reclear, and this is just how much space we had, and we were like, fucking make it work. Like just figure it out. And it was actually easier. Like the soaks were all on top of each other. The healing circles had like just barely enough room to spread out at the back part of this zone with the rest of us under the boss. And then like the fall off mechanics just like got every external and ran out of the group, and I don't know, like it was like that it loses points for that. But I don't know. I think they deserve a lot of credit for how cool the boss was. Like you're saying C, I will fight you to the death to not put it in C. I don't think it ended up being the S tier boss it very could have and should have been if it was like maybe a few more pulls. I think we 7-shot this. 3 of the wipes were to tech reasons, and other than that, we should have 1-shot it. And that if we should 1-shot the wing end boss, is that it just loses points for that, right? Like what is this boss competing with? Top of my head, Enerva, Council of Blood, Lihivam,
Golem, Halandris, Dathia, Kurog, and then what were they in the last raid? Forgotten Experiments and Rashok. It's just significantly easier than every single one of those that I just mentioned, right? So
yeah, I'm not too concerned with like if you guys are able to 5-shot it versus 15 versus 25. Like I don't think that's the reason that I want to put this low. For me, the reason I want to put it low is like you spent a lot of time there drawing a raid plan of what you would have done if they'd done the fight right, but then none of it actually mattered, right? Like there were all these ideas they had going for it, but none of that matters because you can just do the fight regardless. So it's less a question of like overall number of pull count tuning and more a case of just none of the mechanics on this fight that are supposed to matter actually matter if you can do a couple of core things correctly, like break the seeds or break the roots and then heal them up. Everything else is fixable with very little risk, which once that kind of illusion of these mechanics mattering goes away and like the push timing mattering goes away, I think there's not much left behind the facade on this fight.
Okay, so you're putting it in C. I have to put it in at least B.
Yeah, I'm fine with compromising up from there.
Yeah,
but that would be I would stick by that. Yeah,
and I also just would encourage, just like Volcoross, I would encourage Blizzard to make more Larodars. The issue with Larodar had a lot to do with tuning and maybe a small change in the way that P1 worked from this boss being like an all-time great mid-tier boss. Whoever made this should keep making fights like this, and I hope they try to do Larodar well at some point in the future, because I just think the general concept, uniqueness, and creativity of this is really, really fucking good.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. Like, I think this is not a case of flawed theory. I think it's just a case of, like, it turns out it really does matter that the mechanics actually are tuned to do something to you.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, you can have the coolest boss design in the world, but if you just, like, go in, don't have to think about any of it, and it dies, like, then none of that matters, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And, yeah, even not at the highest level. Like, most guilds probably killed Larodar very, very, very fast. How fast did you kill Larodar?
Like 16 pulls or something, which was pretty slow, but that was, week 1, and there were some incidents.
Oh, yeah. This is definitely a boss where there can be incidents. That is for sure. All right, moving on to the Grass Wing with Council of Dreams, and we ended up putting this as our lowest rated boss, but in the B tier. I think we were in general being pretty charitable. I'll actually go first here, so you don't have to go first the whole time. Bro, they have got to stop making mid-ass council fights. It's been so long since we have gotten a good one. Like, maybe they have to be later in the raid to be good, but like we've seen this over and over again with Primal Council, with Prototype Pantheon, with these mechanic spammy, just bad fights. If there's a council fight in the first 3 fights, you as a WoW player know that it's going to be trash or mid at the absolute most. And this one, they clearly made you, okay, Forgotten Experiments, they realized, hey, we're kind of over the whole stacking up 3 mobs and the fight's over in 3 minutes, week 1 kind of thing. So let's make it so they come out one at a time. Okay, Forgotten Experiments was a cool take on that. This was a terrible take on that. This is, you cannot stack these 3 bosses up and they will just annoyingly be a little bit too far spread out from each other. And that part of it was like super, super frustrating. And I don't know, like Blizzard's idea, we just talked about how they need to have a Volcoross in every raid. Okay, I think Blizzard thinks that there should be a council in every raid, and I don't necessarily disagree because they've done good council fights before. Council of Blood, Twilight Ascendant Council, whatever the third boss in Throne of Thunder was, that council was a sick fight. Like, they have made good council fights, they just haven't made a good one in a long time. And for an otherwise very good raid, I think this is like a pretty big stain on it, and I think Blizzard needs to completely approach the way they look at council encounters, because they've done this same fight like 3 times. Like, each boss does a thing that interacts with the other one, right? They did that with Primal Council, they did that with Prototype Pantheon, they did that with this fight where, oh, this boss spawns these green things, well, you're gonna get turned into a duck and get rid of it. If to get rid of the bears thing, you have to turn into a duck, which Pip makes you do, and this girl's gonna cast vines on you, which you have to hit it with the charge. Like, that whole concept has been done so many times. And then also one extra big negative here, which there is a positive that you get turned into ducks. I think that's kind of fun as like a general bait thing, not like the actual way it interacts with your gameplay. The correct way to do this fight on Mythic is to turn like 10 people into ducks in the first 30 seconds of this fight to get rid of the massive amount of green circles they put out at the beginning. So like, people are in lust in their cooldowns, and it is absolutely the best thing to do for them to just turn into ducks and run around for a while. And that, I don't know. I've said what I think about it, but you can go ahead.
Yeah, like the other strat, my guild just used a strat where we just had 2 people just swapping duck back and forth with each other, which was also kind of just a weird way to solve this fight.
They overdid it, the duck thing.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, there are some things they tried here that are new. The fact that it's 4 bosses or 3 bosses that don't don't share HP but also aren't stackable kind of is an interesting idea. But yeah, I think this one was an obvious one from testing where it's like we could all kind of tell we weren't gonna have much fun fighting this thing, and lo and behold, we don't have much fun fighting this thing. It's not what we want to do, right? It's not really possible to add difficulty in a way that we're gonna enjoy on a fight like this. And to their credit, they didn't add too much difficulty to it, so at least it didn't like commit any grave sins or anything like that. But it definitely didn't do anything good either.
Yeah, I want to put this boss in whatever the lowest tier is.
Yeah, I'm fine with slapping it in D. I don't think it's worth adding an F or anything. But
yeah, it's bad.
Yeah.
Bad fight. Okay. All right. Nymue, also a wing end boss, just like Larodar. I think Nymue died in 3 tries, so you could definitely apply the same level of thinking that you did to Larodar, right? Where it's like, even if you make a boss with all this kind of stuff, it didn't really hold up to the test, right? So I'll let you go, but I still think Nymue is a good fight. Like I don't think Nymue is a bad fight. I think the visual difficulty of this fight was vastly overstated from people after watching it on testing. I think the whole idea of you having to go back and send different groups is a fun thing, that moving things around was also a cool thing to do with AUG, right? Like normally you just have DPS like separate their cooldowns, but like this could be a fight where you have AUG evokers specifically buff the exact 4 people going back killing this ad right at the right time, and that was like an interesting challenge to solve. For how easy this is, I don't think it's as unique and as cool as the boss design of Larodar, but I am not a big Nymue dobby, so but let's see if you are.
Yeah, I'm an apologist for this fight as well. I think it has a good mix of, especially for a wing end boss, like mid tier. It's nice that it has some amount of kind of organizational complexity, and then it has a high degree of individual gameplay difficulty, right, where you just need to dodge the cutters and like make good snap decisions. But then it doesn't actually have a whole lot of like mid-fight strategic interaction, which I think is a really cool, like if you kind of break down raid fights into those 3 categories, it's rare to have one that just has like only 2 of those 3, right? Like pre-fight planning, in-game, all 20 players playing well, but you don't really have, like, there's not really much for you to call in the middle of this fight, right? Like, what do you do, right? Just like, yeah, soak the flowers, I guess, you know, go back group 2, but like there's not really anything else that a raid leader adds to this one, which I think is kind of a cool design. I like the emphasis that it's placing on just individual play the whole way through, and I think it's correctly punishing where if you get hit by a cutter, somebody's got to help you, although you're not just instantly dead. And you know, soaking the feathers is important, or sorry, soaking the flowers is important, but not, you know, existentially vital that you do it immediately. It's just something you want to take out as soon as you can. So I'm pretty happy with this fight. I think it is one where the mechanics are tuned to be correctly important. You will feel it if you miss some plants, in a way where on Larodar you don't feel it if you don't clear the room enough. And yeah, I'm happy to call this again, like maybe a little bit too easy, but honestly I think this is one where like your guild's individual play level across all 20 players is high enough that it really should be expected that even if this is 3 pulls for you guys, it can still be a really
what is the pull count? Do you know, or like word on the street, like what is the respectable amount of pulls for Nymue?
So progstats.io says 20 to 36 for this boss.
I mean, that's like exactly what you want from a boss, right? It's just that when you find bosses that have mechanical responsibilities like Nymue does, if you're basing your opinion off the raced world first, there are certain bosses where we are going to vastly outperform the average, and it is always personal responsibility, soaking, dodging kind of fights. So it's always going to trend. Like, that's actually surprising. So we did Nymue in half the pulls we did Larodar, and it seems like the community, that exact number is flipped. And
Larodar is 12 to 22 on the same website. Volcoross is 4 to 10, Gnarlroot 2 to 6. So yeah, I mean, it's definitely a fight where you guys overperformed, and you guys should overperform, and it's still, I think it holds up pretty well. I do think that a lot of the complaints that people have about visual clarity on this fight that's going to be based on like whenever you get stunned. Often it's because you're not paying enough attention to it, although it is sometimes legitimately pretty hard to see.
I still think the hardest thing to see. I
wouldn't give it great marks on visual clarity.
I still think from the very beginning of listening to people talk about this fight, they were saying how everything was green. Like on Smolderon, it's hard to see things because everything is red. And that's actually true, especially because the ground is red too. This fight, everything is green, but it's not hard to see everything that is green. In fact, the hardest thing to see on this fight is red. The mythic soak that spawns right here is easily the hardest thing to see on this fight, and it's the only thing that isn't green. Yeah, I don't know. This is crazy. Also, I'm just remembering that Yips plays WoW in windowed mode, and every time I watch his PUV full screen, it just blows my fucking mind. But all good. So where would would you put Nymue?
I think I'd be pretty happy to call it an A. I don't know. I think it's doing its job pretty well.
I agree with that. I completely agree with that. I think Nymue's a good fight, but definitely one where I think the average opinion of people who have done this that aren't in the race world first is going to be a better metric than people who did it during the race, for sure. All right, Smolderon. We gave Smolderon an A, but I think we talked about how this one might be one of the ones we're wrong about because it might just be like an obviously S tier encounter. I think this is the first one of all the bosses so far, which we're about to get into 2 others that run into this issue, where Smolderon had a private aura. I think the private aura situation on Smolderon absolutely detracts from the feeling of how good the fight is and like how you interact with that. But I heard there's like some tech now where you don't even need one. It like apparently there's like a weak aura that goes off the boss's threat table somehow and can assign the orbs, which is like really sick actually.
I think it's not I think the orbs have threat tables because they fixate onto their targets and that's detectable.
Oh, that's fucking sick. Okay, yeah. I did not know that. Okay, that is
very funny.
Yeah, I mean that was the case with a couple other private auras in this raid. Like for example, the seeds in the last phase of Fyrakk are a private aura, but if you've noticed all the guilds, we have an infinite amount of auras for those things, right? Very similar to Halandra spawn weak auras, but just with stacks, right? But that's because the game tells you that you have a seed with like vehicle UI shit. So like you just know that you have the seed, even if you would need to otherwise tell a macro that you, or a weak aura that you do. So they did miss a few of that, and I think there's a whole other discussion to be had about private auras, but this one I do want you to start. I want to know, because I think Smolderon is another boss where the race to world first will definitely affect people's opinion of a fight from just watching it.
Yeah, so
what's your opinion?
I think the private auras is definitely a mark against this boss whenever you have a mechanic like those mythic orbs that like it would be great if it was solved by reactive gameplay of 4 people getting it, realizing it, calling it out, and organizing who was going to break when. That would be great. It would also be fine if you just had a weak aura auto assign those 4 targets, which I guess is now maybe possible now that people have figured out how to get around the private aura on this particular one. But the middle ground of you need to create a weak aura from somebody who's very experienced at weak aura making that also then interacts with a macro that you need to get 18 players in your raid to install and like have keybound, and then you solve it by not really reactive gameplay but just doing a good job of pressing the macro at the right time and then going in order of a list. To me, that is much worse than either of the other options, right? Like either if it was impossible to use the macro and you had to do it as intended, or if it was just weak aurable from the start. So I think that does make it lose substantial points for me, and I really wish they would take seriously the concerns that we have around these private auras whenever there is going to be a macro solution. It's just so much worse than if it wasn't a private aura.
Yeah, exactly. There have been private auras where they accomplish what they want to accomplish. There are private auras where you would have otherwise absolutely had a weak aura assign it, but because private auras existed, that level of annoyance of pressing the macro was enough for you to just YOLO it, right? Like Firestorm positioning in P1 of Fyrakk, the Mythic Soak groups in P1 of Fyrakk, plenty of mechanics throughout the entire raid that you just did that without doing it because it was just annoying. But then the other side of it of every time there is a mechanic difficult enough, people are just going to do it, and instead of them in the past just being assigned, there's just this extra step that is super obnoxious to play through, and like where's the solve for that? How do you solve that? I don't know how you solve that. So I think that definitely takes away from this. I think in general though, I like this fight. I think for a Sludge Fist type encounter, I think I might rate Sludge Fist slightly higher than this, but I wouldn't agree with a take that like Sludge Fist gaps this boss. I don't think that's true. Like
I do think Sludge Fist is slightly more, maybe even worse in terms of the like fight mechanics, but Sludge Fist is way better in the fact of like for any guild that kills Sludge Fist, there comes a point where you reach the end of the fight and you're like, damn, we need to find 5% more, right? Like we need to do just as well as we just did mechanically, and somehow we have to do 5% more damage, right? And that is, I think, one of the core Sludge Fist experiences, one of the things that made that fight so unique. And Smolderon doesn't have that. It's too
even for like guilds that have killed it now like a bit late. Like you think that, I mean, if that's the case, then that's pretty sad, because even Rashok didn't have that problem. Like Rashok, people struggled with Rashok's DPS check until like all the way through Cutting Edge, like the whole patch, because it was so hard to optimize your damage when you had to dodge that frequently, and you never really felt that way. And also this boss has very weird, I wonder if a reason it was undertuned is because they couldn't tell how classes were gonna be able to do damage to this. Like for example, on Sludge Fist, the damage amps are every minute, right? So you know how many people are going to have cooldowns in it. And I imagine from Blizzard's perspective, they will be able to pretty easily figure out what the damage check is needed. And then that was like one of the best made damage checks ever. This fight, the damage amps are 1:10 in, and then they're like 1:48 apart. That doesn't line up with like fucking anything outside of like Evoker, Motes of Opportunity or Possibility or whatever, without Autumn, without like, there's just almost no cooldowns that in this game that are super powerful that line up with that. So like, I don't know if Blizzard was prepared to actually tune this fight. This is a fight where augmentation is also incredible, right? And I don't really know if Blizzard knows how good augmentation is, because still log hooks are just completely fucking broken to this day. So like, if you have two classes in your raid that are able to fully buff the 4 people that are doing, there's very, very few classes that have huge damage in every single Smolderon set, but there's always someone who's pumping every Smolderon set. So like, these evokers just pick those people and then they just become those classes for that damage amp, right? So like, how does Blizzard balance against that, right? It was like almost like built to be. So maybe a criticism of this is if they made the damage amp windows a little bit more normal and less annoying to play around, they would have understood the damage check requirement better. And also maybe players find that more fun, right? Like, do you think that players enjoy really bizarre damage amp timings or ones that line up with their cooldowns, right? Like, I think you'd pretty largely hear that people kind of like when it's a little bit more straightforward, right?
Yeah, it is kind of weird where it's like, okay, guys, use your CDs on pull, but pot the first damage amp at 1 minute, because then you're going to pot the 4th one at 6:30. It's like, okay, this is not something we're used to. I don't know. I mean, on the other hand, you know, they make a bunch of different raids. They've got to make 30 fights in expansion. There's got to be some variety to them as well. So I don't begrudge them too much trying something new when it comes to like, okay, here's a Sludge Fist, but the cooldown timings are weird.
The fact that this died world first with, I don't even know how much eye level we had on this kill, but it wasn't a lot.
Yeah.
We had actually not even sent most of our upgrades at this point, so it wasn't even like we had to fully optimize for damage. And I believe we had 2 DPS dead for the entirety of our last damage burn and killed the boss, right?
Yes. See, that shouldn't be possible. Like the world first kill of this boss on week 1 with even with like splits gear should require you to have like everybody alive the whole way through, I think. I don't know. I mean, again, like maybe there's a little bit of give there for the very, very world first guilds, but remember, you guys were doing this at what, 474 with 1 crafted piece or something? And
good question. Yeah,
it's not going to be nuclear difficulty for everybody else reaching it at 480 with 2 crafted pieces, or in 2 weeks time reaching it at 485 with a Helm enchant. So it's not a case of like I'm not arguing for this to be nuclear difficulty for everybody. I'm just saying it should be. Yeah, like it should have been a slightly higher check for you guys and for everybody else.
473.5 item level with multiple deaths. That, like, I mean, you're gonna have 489 eye level this patch or something close to that.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, that's kind of an insane gap. Not to mention that, and people often don't talk about healers, which shout out ignoring healers for sure. But I think that Sludge Fist, which is the main. Sludge Fist is the bar, right? When you're going to make the second, third to last boss a burn, the Sludge Fist is the bar, right? This boss didn't have nearly as interesting enough healing. So this boss had like big bursty healing during these circles, and then like the rest of the raid kind of wasn't taking damage unless they randomly got one shot because they fucked up tornadoes. Sludge Fist was like a tremendously hard and fun healing encounter. And I think this fight like doesn't do any of that justice. I think it looked cool. Like Balrog's boss model has always just been fucking goated, right? I think that's great. I can tell you it felt awesome when we killed this, even though it wasn't as difficult. But I mean, I don't even know how many pulls this would have taken us. I don't know if you saw. We tried to cheese this fight. Were you following our progression on this?
A little bit, but I didn't see how you tried to cheese it.
Oh, okay. So we spent the first 15 pulls on this because it would make a lot of sense. So you know how the boss like does its first bait, and it does like you do the first bait, you put all the fires here. All right, but the second bait happens the second the tornadoes go off. It happens the exact same millisecond. So what we did was we had the raid soaking the brand right here, and we had every single person with a tornado circle. Actually, the best way to put that would actually be doing this. Okay. All stand around a gateway. Okay. Just like right around a gateway. And then we had a gate going from here to here. And then these people, after they spawn their healing circles, they would spawn them under them and rotate from here to here. But the bait would happen exactly with these people here and these people here, making a perfect bait, right? Like these people would spawn the fire here. It'd be perfect room conservation, and no one had to think about dodging tornadoes. There's this half-second window before tornadoes spawn where they don't do damage to you. So every single one of these players would just take the gate. We have 3 or 4 pulls of this working for the first like 3 sets of tornadoes. And then you would bait all these perfectly, and then all you had to do is everyone would end up being here, and you would have to dodge 1 wave of tornadoes, and it like totally trivialized the fight. Why we stopped doing it was because there was some like weird server tick shit where like it was just not enough time to where like every 3 sets of this second pool, someone would die. Like one person would just get ticked like 15 times randomly, even if they took the gate early. So we ended up scrapping it. So we ended up spending probably 15 pulls of no progression just trying to make this thing work, which is weird. That's something you do in progression, right? Like if you have something you can do that trivializes the fight, you spend the time doing that if you're the first person to the boss, because it can shave 20 pulls, right? And these are really quick 15 wipes, right? And then we ended up scrapping it and going away. So of us pulling this boss with our kill strat, we probably only pulled this boss like maybe like 35, 40 times. And is that a good number you want for a sludge fist? Like that's just a little low, right? So
yeah, like you should have the experience of completing the mechanics of the fight and then working to optimize the enrage while still losing some pulls to screwing up the mechanics, right? Or to like playing it more aggressively to do more damage. And that this fight lacked that.
Yeah. Okay, so we have to rank this guy. I don't.
I think it's probably still worthy of an A.
Yeah,
all things considered.
It can't be S. S is like this boss was a really, really hard optimization check. Actually, honestly, this boss is a hard optimization check from being S. I think.
Yeah.
Like if this boss was, we had to get, or your guild with more guild the next week had to get to the end of this fight 5 times and find the damage. Which there's an insane amount of optimization you can do with damage, by the way. What we did in testing for this was we had assassination rogues, which have like the biggest burst in the game. We were having evokers play that bottom left capstone thing that spawns these orbs that give CDR timing. And with 3 evokers, 3 Aug evokers, there was enough motes for all 3 evokers and the 2 assassination rogues to get Breath of Eons up and Death Mark up with obviously Kingsbane in every single amp. And that amount of damage is like fucking, they would have been doing like 500k, like just absolutely insane damage. But that, they didn't even require us doing that. You just kind of had to pull to the very end of the fight and do it. But yeah, there was a lot of room for that to be done. So I think A, probably ahead of Nymue, I think.
Yeah, I think better than Nymue. Yeah, I think best of the ones we've done so far.
Yeah. Okay. We have old Tindy. This was probably when was the last? Is Halandris the only other boss that was this fun to watch during the Race World first? Do you think?
Compared to Tindral?
Yeah, like you like.
I think that Tindral, Halandris, and Fyrakk all had they were all exciting to watch, but they did all have the same kind of problem of just like the pull's going good, everybody's dead, which is I don't know. I mean, that's fun to watch, but it is not. I don't think it's like perfect viewer experience either.
I just think that Tindral had like the best cuts you could possibly do. Like you're watching people soaking seeds, and then you do a quick camera cut, and you're watching some people dragon riding through 500 beams, and then like torpedoing into the group. Like it just looks fucking incredible. In that way, I can tell you. Oftentimes when I will have maybe a different opinion of a fight than our raiders will, because my job is to problem solve and strategize the fight, solve the millions of problems that come up every pull and minor optimizations and changes you can make. That is my job, and that is often different than being in the raid every pull and like feeling the boss out. So I usually ask them, like mostly through progression, I think on the last day or the second to last day we were on this, and I said, do you guys actually like this fight? I was actually kind of expecting to hear no, because I think the seeds were like really stressful. And there was a lot of times where you feel like you played it really well, but you just got like insanely bad spawns and it didn't work out. But they all immediately were like, this is fucking awesome. The healers were like, this is like one of the hardest healing fights we've done. Like, this is really, really fun. The players in general just felt really good about doing the fight. So I have a lot of weight for that. But that being said, I think we as a guild and Echo are going to feel totally different about 3-second seeds than the rest of the community. I think going forward, most people, I think this boss has the potential to be Halandris in a way, where Halandris was this really, really awesome, really hard fight, very organically hard fight. And then they made a change and the fight was nothing like what it used to be afterwards. And people like, no one, you are lying if you killed Halandris with 30-second bombs and that is like a memorable boss kill to you. Like it was just it was just a bad boss, right? So I don't know. What is your thoughts on all of that? What are your thoughts on Tindral? I think you're like halfway through progression now, right?
Yeah, we're at 40%, so we've made it to the third platform. We've broken the shield. We've wiped to the first seeds in the fire beam there. Despite the fact that they last for a literal eternity, but
Yeah.
that was our last. That was yesterday we got there. So I mean, and we're also like 250 pulls in, which is wild. I personally enjoy fights of that difficulty and type. Like I enjoyed progressing Halandris on the like the version that the Race World First guilds killed. I enjoyed all those sorts of fights, but I do agree that like if we can't kill it this reset, it probably shouldn't continue to be like that for next reset, and it definitely shouldn't be the one after. Like it should be 3-second seeds is the kind of thing where you're doing it and you're like, this is messed up. Like there's a sadist.
Oh, if Blizzard
encounter.
could go back in time, those seeds would have been either 4 seconds in each phase or 5 seconds in each phase in a heartbeat. It's more that the timing of the nerf, they didn't want to like have either of us feel like we were cheated. So like that was like a weird Race World First integration, or like a weird Race World First minded nerf thing. But like I think it was good at the time. But like,
and I like trying to do that fight that you guys did as well. Like I enjoyed doing that, but I think I shouldn't get more than a couple weeks to try it before Blizzard's like, all right, you know, we've got to make this so that the people, especially because you can pretty quickly get to this boss. Like if they don't nerf this thing next week or the week after, there's going to be a lot of guilds reaching this boss and having that Halandris experience of like, our guild will never be able to do this until it's nerfed, therefore what's the point, right?
yeah.
So that is definitely a ticking time bomb on this encounter, and that's why grading it at this point, like to me, it actually really is important, the long-term grade of this fight, whether they correctly nerf this boss in the next 2 resets, correctly, and they nerf it by an appropriate amount, such that it is still enjoyable, right? Like they don't give it the 30-second Halandris bomb treatment.
So do you think this is the hardest second to last boss ever?
Yes, I think so. Yeah, I mean, Stone Legion Generals is the other one that's up there in pull counts, right?
So Fallen Avatar, I think, is the only one that has more pull count than this. But that is weird because you're venturing into the territory of comparing between eras. Like for example, Fallen Avatar would get absolutely waxed by current Echo or Liquid. It would die so fast. Like how much better the guilds have gotten since then is insane. And pull counters are in general. This is a really, really weird pull counter boss because this is a boss where you just absolutely farm wipes in the first 30 seconds, right? As you're learning it, and especially as you're the guild like we were that strategized that part of the fight. Like that is just, you just rack up pull so fast. So like, I don't know. I'm pretty sure this is the hardest non-end boss in. I asked them, I was concerned about Halandris. I was like, is this boss harder than Halandris? And I asked them while we were doing the fight, and I was expecting to hear like some like conversation about it, and they were universally just like, yes, like this is a much harder than Halandris fight. But also, I think it kind of depends on your job. Like, I think maybe last phase seeds on Halandris were harder than any singular part of this fight. But, like, the whole fight being hard for this many people is, like, obviously just generally more difficult. I think it probably is. This is probably the hardest non-end boss they've ever made.
Yeah, which, again, is, like, I think it can even continue to be hard after they nerf it as well. Like, that, I think it probably should be hard for the next couple months. And yeah, I think the difficulty of this fight, like I think it lands in pretty good places, like dodging the beams, getting under the boss, getting out fast, spreading quickly, and then, you know, an instant snap decision about what you're going to do with each seed spawn. All of that I think is good. I don't know. I mean, we were very high on this boss out of testing. I will say the mythic version of this fight is very different than the mythic testing version of this fight was, right?
So I've showed that on stream. I probably won't do the whole thing again, but I showed our like lowest pull on testing. It was like 23% or something. And the last phase in testing the second phase and the last phase in testing compared to the last phase on Mythic is just fucking hysterical. It's like a complete, they actually just like, if there was a speed dial at how fast the boss, this was funny. When we killed Smolderon and did a few Tindral pulls off stream, I have a message in the Liquid channel. I'll pull it up. This is at midnight, and I just go, Lamau, does this boss have like bloodlust or something? Because it was just doing everything it was doing in PTR, but as if he was lusted or was just, they turned the dial to be double speed. So yeah, I don't know. This fight's fucking crazy. Now it comes down to ranking it though. What do you think?
I think it still deserves the S. I think it's still up there. I think that the concerns about like seed difficulty being a little too high. I think for the first few, weeks of an end boss or of a second to end boss in a tier, like it should be that hard. I would say this is an S conditional on them not over nerfing it, but also not like under nerfing it over the next few weeks, right? Like giving it the correct balancing going forward.
I'm a little torn. I think this was S tier for us. Like our experience of this boss was S tier, no question. I think the experience of every guild doing Tindral when they make all the seeds 5 seconds will be S tier. I think some of the guilds that are killing it now, I think it might be a little too much to ask and also a little bullshit for sure, to where I bet for them their experience was not the best. And I also think this fight has other detractors where... So there's this weird lag thing that happens on Tindral that's very, very annoying.
Yeah.
And I think takes away from the boss's quality. We were dealing with some very weird shit where our boss, exactly 3 hours into every raid, would just start lagging out and we had to soft reset the instance. And that was very frustrating. We felt like there was nothing we could really do about that.
Yeah.
So we have Tindral there. I would say Tindral has enough problems with it to where if there was another S tier boss, it would probably fall below it in the S tier, but I think it still does need to be that. And truly a marvel that they made a boss that is a healer, a moonkin, and you dragon ride on it, and it was like one of the best bosses they've ever made. So I think that is super cool.
Yeah, I think, again, like, brave, right? Very brave for the person designing this fight to, like, just do all this stuff on it, and I'm glad they did, right? Like, this is one of those cases where if players had been involved in the early decision-making process of this fight, it would never have made it like it did, right? Like, the initial idea would have been laughed out of the room, but it was, I'm glad they stuck with their guns and they made it like this.
Okay. Now we're on to Big Fyrakk, the second dragon end boss of this expansion. Actually, wait, isn't Sarkareth the dragon too? Kinda?
Yeah, kind of. Drakthir, I don't know. I think those count. I call those dragons in my raid.
Okay, so the last dragon of this expansion. I think just right off the bat, significantly better than Fyrakk's brother Razageth, right?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, Razageth had difficulty to it, but a lot of it was dumb BS difficulty, right?
Oh, sister, sorry. They're all one big dragon family. I always forget.
Oh, I thought that was intentional.
Oh, no. I mean, I have fucking no clue. Okay, wait, is Fyrakk the girl or Razageth?
Fyrakk's a boy, Razageth's a girl.
Oh, cool. All right, we'll learn something every day. All right,
Yeah.
Let's go phase by phase before we give the actual opinion. What is your opinion of phase 1 of Fyrakk?
Phase 1 Fyrakk, I think, does a pretty good job of introducing the fight. I think it's got, interesting mechanics. I think it's appropriately mythic without being... I mean, so, like, there's maybe argument that you could make that it's kind of, like, the fact that the damage is irrelevant on the boss in this phase once you have enough of it is worse than the, like, Sarkareth or Jailer paradigm where P1 damage does matter.
I would agree with you there.
But I don't think that's a huge knock against it. I think the phase works pretty well. I think the mythic projectiles actually from the Dream Rend on the footage is kind of weird. It's kind of weird how easily baited they are to be irrelevant once you're dodging them. I think they're mostly just existing to force you to be moving during the blazes afterwards, but again, that's also not like a huge knock against it, but maybe that could be more hectic.
I mean, I think that was only done... We only did that to make it like a little bit easier to sit in barriers and stuff. Like, in reality, running against it and running and strafing while it's going at you, you could have done Dream Rends with them right next to you. Like, the difference between running away like this and running strafing side to side are the same. You're unable to stand still and cast, really. Maybe you have a little bit more leeway this far away. The idea was more just angles, right? Like, if you're angling it like this and the Dream Rend is like in the middle of the room as opposed to far, when you shoot over across here in a few seconds, you are not worried about late ones coming into the raid because of the angle you dodged it at. Like, the closer the better. Some little geometry. But I think, yeah, maybe Dream Rend could have been more. I don't know. I thought Dream Rend was pretty cool. I also think Firestorm was pretty cool. I think the Mythic Soak was pretty cool. I thought none of it was... See, the thing is you could say that all of those things would be harder. Like, for example, is it weird that the frontals don't one-shot you? Yes or no?
I think it's fair. I don't know. Maybe they should leave behind, like, a nasty dot as well or something.
Yeah.
But
yeah, like...
I think it's good that it's not just straight up one-shot. I feel like that would be very tedious.
like, for example, we're bordering on the territory of saying, like, could they have made this thing harder? But let's just take it phase by phase, because obviously the boss ended up being hard enough on its own. So I don't think it's saying, like, the boss is bad because the P1 frontal mechanic. Bro, if these frontals one-shot you, the amount of pulls this would have, I mean, it would have been so fucking hard. Because you can bait them, but they're really random. So, like, you can't always bait them. So, you know, there were some snipers, as we called them, that you are like through the boss and you can't see them. I think this was 2 examples of Blizzard actually having private auras do what they were intended to do. And the first one is Firestorm. For example, if during this Firestorm right now, if this was not a private aura, would you have 4 markers down or 4 general spots in the room and a weak aura tell each person to specifically go to one of those spots? The answer to that is yes. 100% yes. Could you use a macro when you get Firestorm to have that weak aura assign it for you? Also yes. But is the like annoyance factor of pressing the macro enough of a deterrent to just YOLO it? Yes. So you just YOLO it. I think that is exactly what, anytime they make a private aura, they are trying to do exactly what they're doing with Firestorm right there. The exact same thing in these Mythic Soaks. If these Mythic Soaks, also a private aura, were not a private aura, would you have an exact spot that each one of these goes, and would you have the 3 people who get it get assigned to a side, and then every single person with a priority system and a backup to perfectly make sure that enough people are in each soak, or an optimal amount of people are in each soak? Would those all be assigned through some 10-head weak aura? Yes. Were they? No. Because you don't need to. You can YOLO it. But it does, in a way, save you from yourself of doing things like that, because mechanics in general when YOLO'd are more fun than if they are handled like with a weak aura like that. That being said, later on in the fight you definitely run into some bad versions of private auras, but I do think it is important to look at the good and the bad to at least understand why they're doing these things. And I think in general this is one of the better P1s they've made. You mentioned Sarkareth having like P1 damage matter for the end boss DPS check, and I think that in general is good, and I would prefer that, but I don't feel like I would ever write it off to where if the boss didn't have a P1, I think the best Mythic End boss ever could be made in the future.
Yeah.
And it involves P1 having a damage check and not applying its damage to the rest of the fight. But I would agree with you that I prefer it.
Yeah, I agree with both of those points, 100%.
I also really like the frontal mechanic in that, as the beginning of progression involved us saving personals and just making sure we brute force through every wave and didn't die to these. And if they were one-shots, you wouldn't have been able to make decisions like that. And then as we got better and better at the phase, what we were able to do is have more and more range to go out of range of the boss and like be ready to pre-bait these in certain parts of the room to make them less lethal, which was like a fun thing to keep getting better at, which allowed us to move our personals to the parts of the phase that did damage to you that was unavoidable. And I think that problem-solving process and progression, which is probably something that not a lot of viewers realize, is actually really, really cool. How do you feel about the Dispel mechanic? You haven't been on the fight yet, but just like general thoughts on it.
Yeah, so there's a couple different parts about it that are interesting. I will say it does feel like the ones that are just applied, the blanket stack to the raid at the start of Intermission 1 feels... I don't know how you're supposed to do that without Mistweaver. I don't know what the thought process there is supposed to be.
So, funny story, the very first time we cleared the intermission without a weak aura at all, we did it with Revival not being up. But we had our entire raid be stone form except for 6 people, so everyone just bricked the fuck up, got rid of their debuff, and then we just single dispelled the 4 people remaining, and then like the last 2 people that had it were tanks. So like, and that wasn't assigned, that was just, we just did it, right? So like, is it possible that a Mistweaver? Yes. Does it require your entire raid to almost be dwarfs? Certainly yes. Or at least have like priests be more meta, and you would just like quadruple mass dispel after the gateway to get rid of it or something. But like, yeah, I mean, it is bordering on the line. I mean, if you would be foolish to not bring a Mistweaver to progression anyway, because they're super broken, but also like you could have ran, I think 2 Mistweavers was probably better than Holy Paladin, I think, but like then you have to bring Ret, and Ret definitely stinks. So yeah, I don't know, but it's definitely a thought.
Yeah, I'm not 100% confident about that. I think the dispel, like the single dispels that are happening the rest of the time, I'm not a healer. I know a lot of healers like complain about that.
I've never heard I'll just stop here. I've never heard someone be like, this mechanic's cool. I think it was a bad cook. It was different. They didn't make it like super annoying to require dwarf, because if every healer just dispels on CD, you get rid of all of them. But I think if you design a phase where a mythic end boss first phase where you press dispel on cooldown, I think that is just bad for gameplay. gameplay, straight up. I just think healers don't like it, so therefore probably not good. You can make dispels, and I often hear people that are not healers, by the way, like complain about this. There's like, oh, I mean, healers always dispel and stuff like that. No, this is different than that. You can have interesting dispels that do not require you literally pressing a button. If every single person in this raid that plays the game did P1 Fyrakk, and you had to press a meaningless does not feel good button every 8 seconds, you would also complain about it. It just isn't fun. And I think they could have made that more difficult and more interesting by just changing that up. So I would say overall, though, I think P1 of Fyrakk is a good/great P1 end boss phase. I think it's an awesome phase. I don't think it's the best P1 ever. I think Sarkrest P1 is noticeably better. But I think that it is certainly a good phase. So let's move on. Do you agree with that? Or do you...
Yeah, I think that's fair.
Okay, how do you feel about the intermission?
So the intermission is where Private Auras rears its ugliest head of the raid, right? Where you have to macro, and like trying to solve this without doing that is just going to lead you to like 20% of your pulls being unsalvageable. That I think is quite unfortunate. Aside from that, I like the gameplay aside from the Private Aura macro shenanigans here. So it's a shame, but yeah, the phase is really marred by that. So again, for those who don't know, like half the raid gets Shadow, half the raid gets Fire here, and you just have to have everybody who gets one of them press a macro, and that will then assign you in an arc around the boss. And if you try and YOLO this with just people going to certain sides and generally favoring those sides, you run a serious risk of being very overloaded.
You get RNG hard
on one side. Yep. Yeah, and that like you can't react to it in time. You can't adjust to it correctly without a macro, basically. Like it's not gonna happen.
Yeah. So we did it. So our third, and we actually tricked ourselves. In our third ever intermission, we did not have a weak aura created for this yet, because it wasn't really obvious how this intermission would work going into this. And what we did was while we were getting pulls on the boss still and still getting better at P1, we did get out of the P1 intermission the third time we got into it. We assigned people in a rough spread around the boss, and we just had people look at the debuffs on other people's characters, and we had a few swing people that would go to each side if there was any heavy uncertain debuffs. And we did it in our third try. So very possible. We got really lucky, though. Do you know how guilds sometimes do this thing where they have everything goes right and they have a really lucky pull, and you assume you're farther in progression than you are, and then now you're like upset because you're not getting as far every pull because you didn't realize that you kind of got lucky to get there in the first place? That happened to us there. It was ridiculous that we did that in 3 pulls. The idea of doing that intermission YOLO is fucking impossible, and we tried it for a bit later that day before implementing the weak aura that we ended up using. And it was like extremely inconsistent, and that was like really, really shitty. So I think it's like but I think the phase is really cool. But the reality is, if Blizzard is going to make mechanics or phases this difficult, there is no solution to them without weak auras that isn't going to waste a tremendous amount of time. So like, is it possible? Yes. But I mean, anytime we're doing this to be as fast as possible, right? Anytime you can save time over hundreds of pulls by having something be more consistent, you will use something to automate it, and it's definitely the correct decision. I don't know how Blizzard gets away from this. Like, the only solution is to make less interesting and difficult mechanics. This is a good intermission. There's nothing wrong with the design of this intermission. It's awesome. It's just hard enough to where you automate it for sure. And I don't know how they really cope with that. I think like really interesting to see where they go from here.
Yeah, I also think it's cool that there's a phase like this, and I wonder how they could try and make this, like, if they really don't want us to weak aura this, if they can successfully break the macro thing, like how would you make this work? Like maybe you assign like 5 debuffs each type, and you have 10 people not assigned, and then those people can kind of react based on what's overloaded on their side or not. I'm not sure.
Yeah, it's interesting to think about. I mean, we went through this problem-solving process. We just had really, really tanky people on each edge because they're the farthest away from healing. We had all healers in the backs and Augs in the back so they could reach everyone. We had an even spread of people on the right or left. We had the tanky people stay no matter what. And we had, like, I think it was like 6 people basically and they were people that we can really rely on as players. We had them specifically decide to just identify. You don't even need to look at debuffs. You can look, if you look at people's characters right here, it's very obvious to tell if they are red or purple. And like, if you see a bunch of purples over here and you are red and assigned to the right side as a swing, you would stay. And if you saw a bunch of reds and you were a swing on the right side, you would just swap sides. And it was pretty consistent. Like, we had a good spread. I think there was one pull where all 4 healers and both Augs got purple in the back though.
And that was like, okay, well, you can't have a swing for all three. Then like the permutations of this being RNG death is like, I mean, it just,
Yeah.
right. So like, yeah, it was extremely difficult, but honestly, it was more fun doing that way. But you know, you're not just going to waste time doing that.
Yeah, it reminds me of like the way that you do Siege, right? Where you kind of have to have some people that are reactive, you know, switching sides based on the circumstances. But unlike that, there's a better way to do this fight, so you don't actually do it that way.
Yeah. I don't know, because like it's just such a not like anyone saying like you just ban add-ons and weak auras and raid, absolute foolish opinion. And then also them making mechanics that don't require them. People can say they want that when you look at the raids that if they make 3 raids in a row that are all easy enough where they don't require any auras to be a little bit more consistent, people are going to hate those raids, right? They're going to be super bland. So I don't know. They have a very interesting problem to solve for sure.
Pretty good intermission, but hard private aura problem there.
Yeah, it feels kind of like Echo of Neltharion, where you are more progressing a weak aura than you are progressing a phase, and because it takes a lot of pulls. I know you haven't been on it yet, but like it takes a lot of pulls for people to get used to everything they might be assigned to and how that looks for you to get better at it. All right, I'm interested in your take on P2, just as a phase.
Okay. To me, it seems sort of like the fact that there's just 2 identical ad waves, at least from watching, that part felt kind of weird. I don't know if it was weird to play, but for a Mythic End boss, that didn't feel like enough, you know? Like it feels like the second should be different than the first in some meaningful way. And I guess it is in that you can't lust both of them, but other than that, I don't know. That part felt kind of weird to me. Obviously, this was the phase they had to nerf the most as well, which is another downside for Race to World first, but for guilds reaching it later, that's not particularly relevant. I don't know. I mean, when it comes to an ad phase, this is a very high amount of coordination without there being like RNG to it, really, right? Which is good. And I think the shadow cages and fire things is a good example of a mechanic done well, right? Where it's like you do have to have some degree of reactiveness to that, right? And managing that mechanic. It's weird that killing the Burning Colossus stops both mechanics. That's something that doesn't make much sense, but
do you know why that happened?
It would be more annoying. Yeah, well, it was because it was like not canceling right before.
Yeah, so this happened to us in 3 wipes, and we were just like telling Blizzard like, hey, this is just the worst way to wipe to this boss. But what happened was if you killed the Burning Colossus before these like red things went off, they could have even gone out. But like if it died, which it was reasonable to, before these went off, the people would just be stuck in traps forever and you could never get them out. So their solution to that was if you kill the Burning Colossus, the purple traps and the red debuffs go away. Which was, we found that out, I think, like the next pull after we did that. But then I think there's an even bigger issue with this. Like, this is another private aura problem. Doing these cages natty is psychotic. Like, first of all, let's just say you don't stack up 2. Let's say you spread 4 of them out to minimize damage. It was our idea to stack 2 of them just to minimize logistical problems with this, right? You now have 4 people that each have to find their own person and spread that out without a weak aura in less than 1 second. It's impossible. There's no fucking way, right? Even if you stack 2 of them on a marker, notice here that the red people press a macro. What that macro does is going to assign, as you can see, a weak aura right here to break X. If these 2 people weren't assigned, you add another wipe condition, right? Where, let's say there's no macro here, but the red people know that they need to each break out a marker, and let's say there's 4 red debuffs. If Nick right here and this person who's assigned to break blue each decide, oh, I'm the closest person, I'm going to go in and break this thing. If they both go in, everyone dies to the damage of all of it. So you need to have exactly 1 red, break out exactly stacks of 2, sometimes 3 purples. And if you don't do that, doing that without a weak aura would have been fucking psychotic. You would have wiped infinitely to that going off, which is why for a while, even though it's a huge damage loss, we were burning down the Burning Colossus to not get the second set of cages, just so you don't have to have those, because even with the weak aura, it was bricking you. So
I think Echo did that all the way through progression even.
Yeah. They sacrificed a little bit of... They had the boss go higher into P3 because of that, because their damage check was significantly harder. But we basically chose... We were doing that, and we chose to stop doing it because you had to commit significantly more cooldowns to the ads to kill them. The DPS check of single targeting one thing and then another, even with an extra set of traps, is significantly higher than killing both of them like at the same time. Also, I'll actually give you a number. So we did this in 3 back-to-back pulls. We did 2 doing the burning
burning the Burning Colossus, then doing the Dark for progression, which is still smart for progression, by the way, because boss health in P3 doesn't really matter till later. We were killing them. We killed the last ad during its Enrage cast, and then we did a pull where we just cleaved them and did not burn them instantly and did the second set of cages, and both of the Colossuses were dead 6 seconds before the cast even started. So it was a 10-second difference in those ads being dead, which allowed us to move, I think, 4 CDs to the boss in both ad sets in that phase, which is why we phased a little lower. But yeah, that I fully respect and also acknowledge that like never having the second set of cages potentially wipe you is like really good for consistency at the sacrifice. You didn't need every percentage of boss health that we got, right? So makes sense. Okay, I think this phase is unbelievably mid. I think they cooked too hard on this phase. Healers don't like it because the ads are super annoying to heal and target because of how boss frames work. It's repetitive and does the same thing twice. I think without weak private auras or without weak auras in general, this would have been an absolute nightmare to play. I don't know, the whole like CC, I think it was kind of fun doing the like CC optimization. I liked being able to do that. Like we thought about bringing in Vengeance, we thought about bringing in Blood Decay, an extra Blood Decay, and playing Ret just to make this easier. But like the downside of both of those is so high that like it was fun to kind of figure out a way to do this without that. And I think the only realistic way to do it was to actually autumn your Blood Decay, so the mass grip was up both times. It's like 10 seconds off without it. Like doing this without 2 mass grips would have been fucking insane. So shout out Autumn existing. If it didn't, you would have definitely changed your tank comp. But yeah, I don't know. Of Fyrakk, awesome boss. I think P2 is at best aggressively mid.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think I don't know. I mean, the process of getting those 11 ads gripped together, the fact that you go and like practice it on Heroic, which both guilds did as well, is I think pretty cool.
How did you know we went back in Heroic?
Well, I know that Echo did, and I know you guys. I heard you guys did as well. I don't know where I heard that from.
Oh yeah, I mean I said it on stream. Yeah, I just didn't know how you do that. No, we when we went dark, which is a big reason why we did go dark, is we like were finalizing our ad CC thing, and we just needed to make sure it was perfect. And you can perfectly practice it in Heroic, like the blazes are the same and everything. And then we also fucked around with like DK and DH. And the reason we went dark, we didn't make a lot of progression while we went dark because a lot of it was like problem solving, but that's the exact kind of thing that you don't want to show, right? Like Echo the next day, I think, had to go through that problem solving process on their own for all of those things. And that's just something that they would have just never had to do if we had streamed it, which is like weird because usually going dark, you assume with like big progression, but like there wasn't a lot of progression that day, but the time we saved from the reason why you go dark in the first place was all very significant.
Yeah, I remember there was a lot of angst about, the competition mode is going to turn back on and they're going to jump ahead by 30% and the race is going to be over.
Oh, because that's what happened with
Sarkareth,
Sarkareth,
right?
yeah.
Yeah, but didn't end up being the case this time. Yeah, I definitely understand why.
Yep.
And yeah, I think one of the times they went dark, or maybe, I'm not even sure they went dark for it, but they went in for, there was Heroic
from
in that just as well.
Well, I was hearing it from them. I think they went dark because they think we didn't know about the burning Colossus being burned, stopping the second kit. But we had already done it on stream before that point.
Dude, I feel like anytime either guild thinks the other guild doesn't know about something,
they're wrong. Yep.
They're always wrong. Yeah. It's the same with like trolls on Jaina or undead on this fight or undead on Jailer, like any of that stuff.
Or knockback belt. Like we went, I remember like we put but we had a break specifically assigned for everyone to get knockback belts and even talked about it 2 days beforehand. And then like we took that break later in the day, but then like apparently Echo in their day did it before that break, and the narrative for like an hour was like, oh, Liquid saw they were doing knockback belts, and just people just have no idea what they're talking about. Okay, so we're out of P2 and we are into P3.
This fight looked like a banger. I will say the exponential increase in difficulty in this phase, because you go from like 4 seeds that you can leave on the ground to 8 seeds that you can't leave on the ground, and all of them need to be protected from every single blaze line. I feel like it's cool, and that's gonna lead to a very nice situation where guilds that get here with more damage will be able to dodge the last overlaps that were the most common wipes. So I think it's a cool phase. I think it's got a good amount of like hecticness, and kind of the room is getting smaller. You're having to do a little bit of strategy with where you're going, and that's like there's some planned movement, but also it's mostly just people doing Halandras bombs really, really well, much better than they had to on Halandras, because you can't just leave it, right? You have to actually keep it off the ground as well. This phase looks really fun to do. I haven't played it yet though, so I don't know what the Raider sentiment is about it.
Well, okay, so when we were preparing for this phase, we I was like, in my mind, the way this phase would work, we obviously knew about the corrupted seeds. We figured there would be 8. That ended up being right, but just at a different point. We just figured the boss would come down and 4 corrupted seeds would spawn and 4 good seeds would spawn.
Yeah.
That's what we were preparing for. I think the way they did it makes a little bit more sense, because that would be weird, because then like the beginning of the phase would technically be the hardest and they would only get easier. From a boss design perspective, that's kind of bad. And then they had it be 2 corrupted seeds per, and I think the way they did it actually made a lot of sense. Yeah, I mean, I think it's a really good phase. I think it does. I think some points could be used to criticize it. So number 1, the Firestorm RNG is like super bullshit. Like, we have had pulls where Firestorms just went on the right people a lot, and Firestorms went on the wrong people without any movement speed and the ability to get out. Like, it literally would have been impossible for them to get out even if they were pre-positioned for it. And healers especially, and then like people just tick down. I don't know, like that part of the RNG felt bad. I feel like this part was often referred to as RNG, and it is RNG in the sense that you could do a pull sub 5% and have no one with a seed get blaze, and it's significantly easier than like everyone with a seed getting blaze, right? Even if you have them really, really spread out. But I think a lot of that is just gaming, and you just need to have enough reps there for people to learn how to game, but it is impossibly hard, and the amount of things that could go wrong are like fucking wild. So I think in general I really enjoyed the last. I think this was like one of the better last phases that they've made. I think it was really good. Obviously it was really fun to watch. Such a weird race in that I feel like I'm glad Method killed it from 8% to 0. I think when people were watching, like, people wipe it like 10% or 8% or whatever, a lot of people in the race, especially casual viewers, get really baited by progression, because it is admittedly really hard to understand, but like they see pull counts. I'll give an example of this. So during breaks, I would look at like the little Raider IO breakdowns or like general like sentiments around the race. And I remember we had a pull where we killed the first ads in P2 really early in Fyrakk progression, which was a major point of progression. No one had done this yet. And then Echo had a pull where they didn't kill the first ads, but they had a lower boss percentage going into the first ads coming out. And then like this was after we killed the first set of ads, and then like the sentiment is Echo surges into the lead. And it's like, okay, well they didn't. And then even after that, we had a lower pull and we wiped to the first ads than Echo's previous, which is an objectively worse pull than the one we just had. And people are like, Liquid surges back into the lead. So like the things that people are looking at are just so far off of like how actual progression works and stuff. Like even to the moment we killed it, like we had an infinitely lower chance of killing the boss on our 1.7% wipe than we did on our 5% wipe before that. Like that boss was fucking dead on that 5% wipe. And we wiped to something really stupid. It was not like a actual difficult mechanic set. Like someone goofed insanely bad, and our damage was 2% lower than it was on our low wipe, right? So like that's, if you talk about not winning the race, like it was that pull. The thing is we both had the same amount of pulls when this ended, sub 5% when Echo killed it, but either one of us could have killed it on the first pull, and it wouldn't have been hard to believe. Like that's just how the fight is, and I think that is both really cool and also obviously really frustrating, because like it just felt like anything could have happened, which was like really stressful and also kind of cool. I don't know.
Yeah, and I think crucially, like it doesn't feel like you were done learning and improving, right, and just ready to kill the boss and waiting for RNG to line up. Like you were still getting better with each pull. It's just like that didn't necessarily, like you could just proc a pull where that didn't matter.
Yeah, exactly. And I didn't see Method's pull, but like that, I'm really glad that happened in the spotlight, because I feel like until it happened, people wouldn't have believed that could have happened, but that is actually how. Also, was watching like the POV of the seeds in the last phase a sick viewing experience? It had to be.
Yeah.
Oh my! Like this, like that, like shit, like that.
Yeah.
Like
that little maneuver.
This
that they
happens.
Do where they do the swoop a doop. Yeah.
Yeah. This happens every pull, and it's fucking terrifying, because and a lot of people won't understand. A lot of people think that like Eric did something wrong here by having his blaze in the thing. But in reality, there's enough time to always solve this without them moving. So having the people in the raid try to not hit other people's blazes usually causes blazes to hit them more, right? So if Eric tries to adjust for this, then like maybe he runs with THD here, right? He moves left at the same time THD moves left, and it also could cleave other people or other seeds. So really the only way to play it was blaze people stay still and seed people just fucking figure it out. And I think that's really, really cool.
Yeah, obviously you could, like, if THDs and Eric's were on the same timer, that would be a problem there, but I guess he would have then seen it, so.
Dude,
he could have beat it. Yeah.
There was this fucking evade clip that is like mind-blowing. Let me see if I can find it. All right, this was like a pull. I think this was like a general bad pull, but like fucking dude, look at this. Puts his seed down. 2 blazes are on top of it. He does his. He swoops, goes out of the 1, and then gets out of the
Yeah.
Oh, he fucking remembered. Oh, by the way, do you see, just to show you how much of a crane brain this guy is, do you see this these numbers?
Yeah.
Do you know any lore behind what those are?
No, what do they mean?
It's for, okay, so Evade figured out the exact angles that these things spawned. They always spawn in the exact same angle in correlation to where the tree is. And he had this weak aura made to where if we ever wanted to pixel stack all the orbs and people moved out with Blaze, depending on which Blaze you got, a voice thing would tell you which direction to go with them. They would never cleave each other, and they would never hit a seed as long as you dropped it in the raid before you moved out. And he like made this whole thing, and he played the whole fight with it because he said it helped him like position his own blazes or something. But like if you moved the first set of blazes north, second set to the right, third set to the bottom left, fourth set straight down, fifth set to the left, they don't cleave each other and they don't cleave anyone in the raid. And that's what this is. So as you see the blazes go out, it shows you which one you get and which way to go, which was smart, but also, and potentially really good, but also like just very unintuitive and hard.
Yeah, like you're not going to get 20 people to learn that faster than you're going to do it the right way.
We considered it. Like we actually did 2 polls, like kind of trying it with a smaller set of people. And I think it's so unintuitive. Like you basically have to break your brain from doing the phase normally and just learn one thing. When you get Blaze, you move out in the direction that it's telling you and you press your button and then you come back. You would have wiped probably 5 or 10 times doing this for it to become normal for everyone. But as soon as it became normal to do this unintuitive movement, the entire last phase becomes trivialized. You're just stacked the whole time and Blazes never hit anyone or any seed. I think even if one way they nerf this fight is making Blaze go off in 3 or 4 seconds instead of 2.5, I think that you will do this and it will make the last part of the fight significantly easier. I think it probably is a little too fast though.
Yeah, I think that's fine though. Again, like for the early version of this fight, pre-nerf version of this fight, I think the speed of that mechanic is fine.
Oh, it's definitely was fine earlier. All right, so
Yeah.
we now have to rank Fyrakk. It's the best end boss they've made in a while, I think.
Yeah, I think it's better than Sarkareth.
It's
better than
way
Razageth.
better than Razageth, yeah.
Yeah, it's I think it's up there with Sire and Jailer and stuff. I would put it in S. I don't know. I think it's there.
I think I would put it in S too. Okay, so if we're putting it in S, the only issue I have with S is this boss has a phase that is just fucking whatever. So basically is P1, which isn't as good as Sarkareth's P1, even like looking at a recent raid, but its P3 is just the best P3 they've made in a while. Is that enough to put it like top of S tier? I think there's like enough wrong with it where maybe that wouldn't be the case. My question is, when is the last boss that was like as good as Fyrakk? Like Denathrius maybe?
Maybe Jailer. I don't know. I'm a big Jailer fan though.
Okay. I mean,
Yeah.
it's definitely not a long list of bosses that could be
Yeah.
considered as good as Fyrakk. So
It's definitely up there with Sire, like Gul'dan, those sorts of fights. The goats.
how do you
Maybe it's not quite up there. Like I think it's bottom of S tier, but I think Tindral's also bottom of S tier. So
how do you feel about this raid? So when I think of my top raids of all time, excluding like the old era WoW, so this is just purely from MoP onwards, so not including the ancient shit because it's hard to compare between eras. My list, in not really any particular order, is like Throne of Thunder, Blackrock Foundry, Nighthold, Siege of Orgrimmar, and Castle Nathria. That was my 5 before Amirdrassil comes out. Does Amirdrassil make it into your top 5 raids? And if so, which one does it kick out for you?
well, I didn't play Throne of Thunder, so I think yes for me. I mean, for me, Sepulcher is a very high tier also. Also, I don't know if like Crucible of Storms can make it in, but Crucible of Storms and Trial of Valor are also both raids I remember very fondly, even though they're mini raids.
Okay, well, since you didn't play Throne, maybe you can help me answer my 5. So for me, it would be Castle Nathria or Amirdrassil in the 5th slot. And I'm having a hard time deciding which one of those is better. I'm going to let you know my thought process. I think the bosses up to Sludgefist and up to Smolderon, I think trends in Castle Nathria's favor. I think Zymox and Council of Blood are just better than any fight in Amirdrassil before Smolderon. So I think I would give that big pack of bosses an advantage over Amirdrassil. I think I would give Sludgefist an advantage over Smolderon.
So it's already leaning heavily in Castle Nathria's favor, right? But there's a big one coming up.
Yeah.
So Stone Legion Generals is the worst second to last boss ever, and it is probably the worst boss ever. And Tindral is one of the best bosses ever. So that's a massive swing. Like, huge. I mean, the last two bosses just matter so much more than the ones before. And I think Fyrakk and Denathrius are very similar. I think, like, Denathrius's P2 is way better than Fyrakk's. I think Denathrius's P1 is way worse than Fyrakk's. And I think both last phases were both really cool. So I think Denathrius and Fyrakk are, like, really hard to tell which one of those is better, in my opinion. But I think Tindral... Basically, does Tindral being that much better than Stone Legion... Does that make up for Sludge Fist being better than Smolderon and the first bosses being better in Nathria?
I think yes. I think it should go to Amirdrassil because I think Stone Legion was that bad.
Yeah.
And I think it's like a bunch of small wins for Castle Nathria and in every other slot in the tier. But yeah, I think SLG is enough worse that I would tip towards Amirdrassil, but I wouldn't grudge you either.
No, I think that's probably... I mean, I think they're like really close, but all right, cool. So we ended up... Are we fine with this list? So we ended up being 2 things wrong about Council. We ended up being 2 things wrong about Volcoross. Igira was exactly right. Nymue was actually a tier better than we predicted. Smolderon was the same. Gnarlroot was the same. Larodar we missed by 2 tiers. Fyrakk we missed by 1, and we got Tindral right. I don't know how that stacks up historically for us, but I think that is pretty good. But we have 2 more parts of this that we did that we have to answer for. So I asked you how long. We both gave our predictions of how long this race will last, and I believe you got it very close to right, if not right, and mine was extremely wrong. I believe mine was 8 days, and my reasoning was Thanksgiving is on the 9th day, and I fear that they'll do the same thing they did with Christmas Eve and Razageth on Thanksgiving, which just ended up being absolutely not true in so many ways. I don't know if you actually know this. You might know this. Did you know that they buffed Fyrakk after we were going to the reset? Like, they buffed it for the second week of gear?
Yeah, I like a 5% health buff, right?
Yeah. Which is really significant for multiple reasons. They also buffed the health of the Colossus and stuff. So they just tuned the fight for what our gear was at the time. This is the only raid in WoW's history, besides Sepulcher. So this raid and Sepulcher are the only 2 raids that were actively buffing and tuning bosses in the raid for the gear we had at the time and not leaving them as they were tuned at the beginning. So Denathrius killed in the second week, but was tuned to be killed in the first week. Could have been killed in the first week. We just didn't have enough time. And then it died in the second week pretty fast because we got the reset of gear, and then its difficulty level did not scale with the eye level.
Which I think makes sense because it had already been being pulled, right? And so like buffing it would have been weird.
Yeah. But I also... True, but there have been other raids similarly where they have not done things like that. Like the whole... Yeah. This is very rare that they do this, and Sepulcher and this raid are the only raids where they have done this. And it's also the reason that Sepulcher lasted as long as it did. They kept tuning from Halandris onwards for exactly the gear we had, including tuning Jailer for double legendaries, which you had in week like 3 or something, right? So so that is interesting to happen in this raid. And so we knew the boss wasn't dying before Thanksgiving on Tuesday because Blizzard almost never does that except for Sepulcher. And as soon as they buffed the boss, we were like, okay, it would make no sense for them. If they wanted the boss dead by Thanksgiving, they would absolutely not buff the boss on Tuesday, right? Like they would just do the same thing they've done for Nathria and every other raid. So we kind of knew that was the case. Your guess, what was your guess?
I think it was 10 or 11 days. Yeah. We are looking at a Tuesday, Wednesday, Mythic Plus days, not raid days for the first time ever.
Wait, you're
nights, I think, of this tier.
Oh, that's really interesting.
Fuck, I don't remember. I can't find it. I'm pretty sure you were closer than me. You said like 10 or 11, and I think it was 11 or 12 or something like that. I don't know. And mine was wrong. I just got the Thanksgiving thing wrong. I'm also glad, too. I think them nerfing Fyrakk to be killed on Wednesday would have been, like, very, very strange. So glad that did not become a thing. Okay. And then Dratnos gave his Race to World First comp prediction.
Yeah, I made my own video basically doing this exact same thing afterwards because like, oh, yeah, this would be good content, and use pretty much the same comp, and...
So you got it.
I think it ended up being pretty
You
close.
got it really, really right. Yeah, you started out with Prot Warrior and talked yourself out of it, which was good. We never, ever considered playing Prot. The healer comp you got exactly right, although the healer comp for this raid was so unbelievably fucking obvious. I think I think that a lot of the like healer content creators actually accurately predicted the healing comp, which is usually like, of all of the predictions before the race, there is nothing more comically wrong than what the healing community thinks is good. And this raid was even, they got it right, which is insane. So like everyone knew what the healer comp was. The tank comp also seemed locked in place. Like DK DPS wasn't good enough, and Prop Pally you needed a second buff, which actually wasn't true. So Red Aura was absolutely horrible. Absolutely horrible in this raid. It was a fake raid buff. We were absolutely gearing Yips DK, and we were just going to drop Red Aura altogether from how bad it was. And then on Tindral, mid-Tindral progression, they just fixed Red Aura for the first time this expansion to where it basically has 100% uptime now. So that is super sick. You got double Havoc right. You got double Rogue right. You got double Aug right. I will say, though, at the time of this recording, this was before Aug was nerfed on the Friday before Mythic. And you were going to run 4 Augs on every single fight if they did not make that nerf. So there would have, but you still would have gotten the total number of evokers right.
Dev was a mistake though. Those devs are the balance druid instead of the feral druid as well.
Yeah, a lot of people did not get the feral druid thing right, but I don't blame people for that because it had been 10 years since feral had been meta. But I think a lot of people forget a big reason why that length of time happened. So for a while, feral druids didn't have innervate, right?
Yeah.
So a big reason in that 10 years of why you always played Moonkin was it was like, okay, let's look at the damage difference between Moonkin and feral. Oh, wait, this one has innervate and the other one doesn't. That's the end of discussion. Like, not only for a long time, not recently, but for a long time was ranged kind of superior to melee in raid, but also feral just did not have innervate, so it just wasn't even an argument. And then since they've had innervate, they've gotten close a couple of times, and in this raid, we had Smacked play balance and feral, but we were very set on feral from the beginning, mainly because they are infinitely more survivable. And there wasn't a scenario where balance's AoE would have come into play. Like, for example, if you couldn't CC the ads in Fyrakk, like Moonkin would have been, or if you couldn't like knock the ads in on Fyrakk, like Moonkin would have been, and you would have run fucking 3 of those motherfuckers, right? It's like Moonkin is still very powerful. Just feral was absolutely slightly better, especially when you had a second Wind Fury totem in the raid.
Yeah, the second enhance was definitely that was another thing that I didn't see coming, but it makes a lot of sense given how good melee was and how many you could play.
So I think you would have played 2 Enhance without a second Wind Fury totem even being applied to the second Shaman. I think Enhancer is absolutely ridiculous. I think that class has some of the best design of any class in the history of WoW right now. Super fun to play. Highly recommend any of you who are fond of melee try this spec. But also, it just has an unbelievably strong damage profile. So as soon as we knew that there was going to be ads in P2 of Fyrakk, we ran double Enhance from the get-go because they were always going to top on those ads, and they did. And there's a not easy to quantify, ridiculously high value attached to classes that can have unique, bursty damage profiles in smaller windows that are not tied to long 1 and 2 minute cooldowns. And 20-second Prim Wave is the absolute pinnacle of that, and it enables the rest of your comp to just use cooldowns for boss damage. It's the value of Enhance is fucking insane. Not to mention that if you're only running 1 druid, having a second Windrush totem is extremely good on all the fights. Only problem is they're extremely not tanky, but they have Onk versus like Moonkins. Enhance is like Moonkin, but with Onk. And if Moonkin had Onk, he would have played Moonkin.
Yeah, it's not as good on like Tindral, right? Like that's the fight where Enhance is the most suspicious, right?
So yes and no. So because you needed root damage, so we considered bringing a second Warlock, but thought against it just because Spatter is so OP. We never really struggled with root damage. We actually considered bringing in a second Enhance for boss damage. So Enhance is like top boss damage on Tindral because you can funnel so much on root sets, assuming you're killing roots fast enough. But during all of our progression, we got to the point to where we knew we could kill the boss with the damage we had. And making swaps would have just... That is probably the worst fight of all time to make swaps on mid-progression. You're going to wipe so much. You have assigned spots in quotes, but like, you know, there's so many small things people are doing every pull that you can't really quantify. So it's just a terrible idea if you can avoid it. So we were considering bringing in another one. Basically, you had 2 choices on that fight. You had play 2 locks and play more root damage for safety. Or you had, we know we can kill these roots just fine with proper play,
and we can bring in a boss damage comp to skip an entire set of mechanics, and we always subscribed to the second one of those things.
That makes sense.
Yeah, so enhanced sick. Warrior kind of mid. We thought about 2 warriors on the last boss. Arms warrior, 2 target cleaving and execute in the last phase. That just never ended up panning out. I think we played Fury the whole time. We tried a few arms pulls. I think Rev has always played Fury. Yeah, the wizards in this raid, not a lot of those. You would have sat Warlock definitely if they did not have Hellstones and Gateways. Mage, we probably would never sit Mage, but I think Mage was pretty sittable as well. Bad tier for the Wizards, I think.
Yeah, class balance this tier is definitely something that was quite bad. Like the delta between stuff like Rogue and Havoc and like the field is very large.
Yeah.
So hopefully over the coming weeks they get to work on that. I saw they just posted some potentially even more suspicious set of class balance changes like 30 minutes ago. So
oh, we can look at that in a second. But before we tie this off, let's see. We have, of all the things you got right, it was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. So you got 17 things right out of 20. I don't know if you do this often, but I feel like that has to be really good. I would.
Yeah, I think that's better than I've ever done before. But again, like you said, you know, like the healer stuff was not close.
Yeah.
A lot of that became locked in, right? Like once you've decided where you're, so like the only hard decisions were like what specs are you bringing multiple of, and it's like, yeah, Og obviously. Havoc and Rogue, I think, were good calls, but then other than that, I just had one of each of the raid buffs, and it's like, okay, made my comp. So I think it's a little bit less impressive than it looks.
Yeah, it was kind of like we just had this comp from the very beginning. We never made a comp swap on after we started Tindral, and then also after we started Fyrakk. We ran our exact Fyrakk comp from the first pull of progression on Gnarlroot. It was just like I had this comp, the correct comp, written down in like our one of our spreadsheets for like 2 months, and it just never changed outside of Augs. And I don't remember that ever being the case. It's just this expansion is so weird in that if classes are being reworked, you can just absolutely put a stamp on it and bet on that class being a 2 of in progression. And that's very strange. Like, I mean, you just knew it right away. Like, they were just, look at all the rework classes. They're fucking insane. I don't know. Fucking wild.
Yeah, I gotta say, I'm not a huge fan of that, like, being the rule going forward, especially, like, I mean, look at Mage now, right? It was, like, reworked to be insane 3 months ago, and now it's just in the gutter.
Yep. You get, as soon as you get reworked, unfortunately for Mages and Rep Paladins, they got reworked too early.
Yeah.